stay poor, the rich get rich. That's how it goes. Everybody. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Doctorpiece Theater. I hate this fucking book. We last left James in a hug with Abby, and he left us with this statement. I was saying everything I wanted Abby to hear. That is, almost everything. Chapter 5. I sat in my room thinking about all that happened in the last day. As I slid deeper into thought, a knock sounded at my door. "Dinner's ready, James," my mom said. I responded, "Lentils again." She opened the door and looked at me with a blank facial expression. "We have to talk. Come to the table." As I left my room, I saw a man sitting at the table next to my sister. Trying not to be rude, I said hello, and he smiled respondingly loudly. "Hello! Nice to meet you, James." I asked my mom, "So who is this gentleman?" My mom responded, "Go ahead and sit down, James." I slid out the old-fashioned second-hand store chair I always sat at the table and waited for my mom to explain. "This is Rick. The reason you haven't seen much of him is because he lives all the way on the other side of the mountains in Spokane," my mom said. I smiled, feeling slightly awkward, and replied, "Oh, all right, cool." My sister immediately mocked me. "Oh, cool, Mom. Duh, you're such a dweeb, James." Despite her bratty insult, I could see she too felt awkward about Rick being so spontaneously introduced to us, and was just trying to distract. "Rick and I have been dating for quite a few months now, and are starting to become quite serious," my mom said, clearly seeking our approval. Rick said, "Yeah, so it's finally cool to meet you. Your mom talks a lot about you, you know." I smiled and nodded, while thinking about how odd it was my mom had never mentioned him. Rick proceeded to tell us stories about him hunting animals, his upper-level position at a construction company based out of Spokane, and continued to remind us how happy he was to be meeting us. As far as I could see, he wasn't a bad guy, but as usual, I didn't expect much, knowing most everyone puts on their friendliest mask for first impressions. I'm sure my sister was thinking pretty much the same thing I was. He wasn't my mom's first post-dad boyfriend. My mom inquired, "So how's your life going, James?" I replied, "Fine." Rick asked, "Got a girlfriend?" I didn't respond. I just kept my head down, looking at my plate. My mom looked at me with a proud smile. "James is more of the mysterious type, Rick. He doesn't talk about his relationships." Rick then said, "Oh yeah? Well, if you find a lady half as good as your mom, I'd say you're set." My sister interrupted, "Aren't you seeing that messed up emo chick, James?" Looking over at my sister with a blank face, I said, "Aren't you seeing every guy at school, Lisa?" Lisa looked horrified, and my mom responded, "James!" not knowing what else to say. Rick was the only one still smiling at the table at this point. Moderately upset by what Lisa said, I asked to be excused and went to bed. As I climbed on the bus the next day, Davis hollered, "Praise be to James! Our hero has arrived!" I smiled as I always did. I hated loving his hilarious lines. They were kind of a tradition for Davis. Every time I stepped on the bus, he would yell them. Even when I wanted to be upset, he always found a way past the walls I had built, knowing exactly what to say every time. As I sat next to him, he said, "I've been missing your face a lot, Mr. James. I'm trying to figure out ways to compete with your skates." I smiled and said, "You're one of the only reasons I ride the bus, Davis. You're doing just fine." Davis then jumped up and yelled, "You hear that, everyone? My best buddy thinks I'm pretty fantastic." I laughed, wishing to myself I had more friends like him. As I approached history class, I could see Mr. Hansen waiting in the hall. I tried to walk by him unnoticed, but he said, "Not so, not so fast. You need to go and see the guidance counselor." I asked why, and he replied, "It's about that fight you got in, and Miss Robertson is waiting." I proceeded to the office where there was a line of 3 people ahead of me. It wasn't due to bad scheduling. Miss Robertson was just outmatched by the school population, and considering she was the only person most students know to get free condoms and or advice, she was regularly seeing visitors. "James Patrick," she said aggressively as I approached the old wood and glass door. I smiled out of politeness as she turned to the others and tossed out a bundle of condoms in their direction. "These are a last resort. Abstinence first," she said as she stood by the door waiting for me to enter. It's poison, this book. One of the boys standing at the door said, I actually need advice, but she slammed the door before he could finish speaking. "Have a seat, James," she said. I sat down, and the room filled with a few awkward seconds of silence. She continued, "So it looks like you're healing up okay," I replied, confirming I was fine. Then she said, "I've heard both sides of the story, and I've concluded your friend Jason is destined for not so many great things if he keeps up his attitude." My face remained still, emotionless really. I just sat silently listening. She asked, "What direction do you want to go with your future?" I replied, "I've heard really great things about up." It was like my joke hit a brick wall. She seemed only sarcastically amused and continued speaking. "But seriously, I was told you turned down a teacher's assistant position, which I personally recommended to Mr. Hansen." I replied, "I just wanted to stay in art class." She replied, "With Miss Stanley?" I nodded and laughed. "So who's the girl?" she asked. I was surprised that she concluded so quickly it was even about a girl. But then again, I was just one of those thousands of students who like to think romance is unique, but most all were playing the same game. Miss Robertson had years dealing with people like me. No wonder she could see right through me. For a brief moment, Miss Robertson nearly spoke my mind. She said with a smirk, "Oh, come on. Lots of us like to think we're special, but that just shows you know we really aren't, especially the brats walking these halls." Knowing Miss Robinson had to keep our conversations private, I replied, "There's this girl, Abby. I really like her, and it's the only class I have with her." Miss Robinson was no longer smirking now that I told her who I was interested in. She sat up and looked down at her desk. She moved some items around, and then suddenly she looked me in the eyes and said, "Listen to me carefully. I can't tell you anything about Abby, but I can give you advice. Think twice about getting involved with her, James. I want to see you succeed, and some people being a significant part of your life can make that difficult for you." I didn't say anything. In that moment, I was lost in thought, wondering why she would become so serious over Abby. Miss Robertson then asked, "So I'm not going to try to change your heart. In my experience, that's more often than not a lost cause. But I can change your scheduling to something that fits. Abby has gym between third period. How about you just stick with Mr. Hansen after your first class of the day? Doing so will replace your art class, and third period will now be PE, where you can see your precious Abby." While her attitude towards Abby continued to concern me, I was also curious as to why both Miss Robertson and Mr. Hansen were so adamant about me being a teacher's assistant. But I was grateful they were at least trying to work with me regarding any preferences, so I accepted the schedule change. I returned to Mr. Hansen's class and requested I attend art class one last time before the schedule change. Mr. Hansen agreed, and I made my way over to the art trailer once more. As I walked in the trailer door, I was happy to see Abby once again sitting in the same seat she always did. When I approached her to sit down, She pulled out of my backpack and shook it. "Your backpack has a lot of interesting things in it," I replied. "Oh, really? You went through it?" She responded, "Yes, I did. And by interesting things, I mean nothing, just school junk." I laughed and asked, "Life's got enough burdens for us to carry. Why add the physical weight?" She raised her eyebrows and said, "Okay, Smarty, did you like our bear?" I smiled and replied, "I love it." She threw her arms up and hugged me. Miss Stanley walked in, immediately seeing our hug, and said, "If you're going to suck or eat, go and find an alleyway. There's a trailer. We have good goddamn dignity." Not knowing how to react, I looked over at Abby, silently mouthing, "Oh my God," to me. I smiled down and sat with Abby. Alex walked in the room and gave me a glare, probably because his art partner was still suspended for the fight we had, which meant he had to do it all alone. I tried to ignore Alex. All I could think of was that pea jar, and when I looked at him, it still freaked me out. As class came to a close, we gathered our things and began to walk out. "Bye, Miss Stanley. I'll miss you." Miss Stanley responded, calling me the F word in her natural offensive fashion, and gave the class an awkward, semi-shocked laugh. Walking outside, Abby said, "Why do you think Miss Stanley still has a job?" I replied, "Pretty sure everyone feels like they'll guarantee themselves an eternity of torment in the afterlife if they were to fire someone as old as her." Abby replied, "Yeah, I guess it would be hard getting a job when your resume lists World War I nurse in your work history." I laughed so hard I had to stop till I could control it. "Are you okay?" I asked Abby with a nervous smile. Still laughing, I then said, Sorry, and continued walking as Abby looked at me, bewildered at how funny I thought she was. My reaction really wasn't just about what she said, but the fact she'd said it to me. I felt so important and excited when she gave me her attention. As we got closer to the gym, Abby was giving me a funny look. As I normally didn't walk her that far, I said, "Don't worry, I'm not stalking you. We have the same class now." She replied, "Manipulating your schedule to be with someone sounds like stalking, Mr. Patrick." I said, "Not if you drop Miss Stanley." She pushed me playfully, saying, "Jealous?" The boys split off to dress in their locker, and the girls did the same. I didn't have gym clothes with me yet, so I just sat down on the bleachers and waited for everyone else to get done putting on their uniforms. A deep voice sounded off. "What are you doing here, kid?" I looked over to see a very tall man in the baggiest gym suit I've ever seen. "Hi, I'm James Patrick. I think I have your class now. You can clear it with Miss Robinson." He smiled and said, "Well, James Patrick, I'm your gym teacher, Mr. Mack." I nodded and smiled as he bluntly asked, "You're that kid who got beat up by Jason?" I replied, "Yeah." I pushed him after he pushed me, and then he started throwing punches. He smiled and said, "Well, that's my nephew for you." I froze up and blankly stared at Mr. Mack as his words sank in. I swear I could feel my heart skip when I acknowledged his connection to Jason. Seeing the look on my face, Mr. Mack continued, "Don't worry, between you and me, kid's a prick, just like his dad." Mr. Mack chuckled and walked away. I felt relief and awkwardly smiled only to see Abby in the corner of my eye, busting out of the girls' locker room. She was in her PT uniform and carried a beautiful smile on her face. Running over to me, Abby sat down and gave me a big hug. "I'm so glad you're in a class with me," she said. The gym shirt was hiked up her arms so I could feel her skin connect with my neck. The sensation was glorious. My face was beaming from feeling her warmth towards me. I replied, You will be the one reason I look forward to gym. Mr. Mack overheard and interrupted, as he stood a short distance away. Hey, kid, I thought we were becoming friends. I laughed awkwardly, feeling a little weird about him eavesdropping. But again, it's much easier to close your eyes than it is to turn off your ears. Everyone gathered on the gym floor, excluding me. Mr. Mack immediately noticed I was not participating and said, Hey, if you don't have gear, go in my office and pick out an outfit. I reluctantly got up and walked over to his office where all I realized I would have to sift through was a huge pile of mismatching jerseys and sweatpants to get a half-decent outfit. After changing in the bathroom, I walked out to everyone taking part in dodgeball. I could feel the focus of the room shift on my outfit, and just as I expected, I was greeted with laughter. Hey, at least you won't get your normal clothes sweaty from dodgeball, Mr. Mack said, tossing me a ball as the game was already in play. Before I could even catch it, Raymond, one of the jocks in the class, smacked me in the side of the head. Everyone but a few people bust out laughing again as Mr. Mack lurched up and pointed at Raymond, screaming, You're up, Raymond! Can't hit above the shoulders! Raymond replied with a discouraged snap of his fingers, scowling as he sat on the sidelines. It was odd how he broke the rules and hit another person in the head, yet pretended to be the victim. I never really understood the human tendency to feel sorry for yourself when you're being punished for breaking rules you were well aware of. Abby was on my team. We were down to just a few people. I very quickly found out I was quite good at the game. Better than I had thought, at least. I kind of used Abby as my motivation to do well. I imagine it was some sort of an evolutionary thing, a man trying to impress his mate with physical performance to demonstrate his superiority over other members of the tribe. I kept calling every other ball thrown at me only to return it, hitting a student approximately 1 out of every 3 attempts. I always threw low to decrease the chance of anyone catching the ball. After a while, my consistent efforts paid off. Our entire team was back in play. Raymond had made his way back in the game on their side, but only a small nerdy kid remained in play with him. Raymond would try to catch what we threw, but we always a few inches short of reaching the ball as it flew by. A ball smacked the nerdy kid in his ankles, and only Raymond was left. He tried to throw a ball at my head again, but this time I was ready. Just as the ball flew past me, every person with a ball on my side threw theirs at him. In an almost comedic fashion, every other ball impacted his chest and below. We were all cracking up over it, but Mr. Mack interrupted us, letting us know class was over. Jesus. Before Abby ran back to the locker room, she walked up to me and said, Can you call me tonight? I nodded, smiling, and she kissed me on the cheek. My mind exploded with excitement. From that single kiss on my cheek, my whole body felt light and warm the rest of the day. After doing my chores later that night, I called Abby, like she had asked, and she answered, Hey, you! I replied, Not a lot of callers, huh? She said, Actually, I just embarrassed myself on the last call hoping it was you. My grandma felt pretty special for about 10 seconds. She and I talked for hours. We discussed the plausible absurdity of horoscopes, the secret, the legitimacy of souls, the afterlife, even leprechauns. Very few topics were off limits. Being free to talk about whatever was on my mind felt liberating. Having these convictions with her served as just another reminder that there was someone out there who could really understand me with just as much kindness and as acceptance as I did them. Before I hung up, I said, Abby, thank you for making my life that was imperfect feel perfect. She laughed at how cheesy the line was, only to respond, Well, thank you for being so perfectly imperfect. I felt a warm smile come across my face and said good night. Oh my God. This was the worst fucking book I've ever read. That was a crazy chapter. It was a crazy chapter. Next will be chapter 6, but that'll have to wait till next time. This has been Doctorpiece Theater, and my name is Dr. Dennis Business. And as always, my friends,